it was easy to think you could actually be a CEO and just it's gonna all be wonderful. And then
Right.
of course, so many things happen and you're just thrown into so many situations that are beyond your control. How do you get to a place where you can process all of that always in a way of learning as opposed to having it be a debilitating step back?
When I first sat down with Vas Narasimhan in 2018, he was less than 100 days into his new role as CEO of pharmaceutical giant Novartis. He told me his biggest shock was that every move he made, every decision, was under a microscope. Since then, Vas has had some great successes. He drove digital and AI innovation through the organization and spearheaded life-changing advancements in gene and cell therapy. But Novartis has also faced several setbacks: drug recalls, a tumultuous market performance, and of course, a pandemic. No CEO wants to admit to failure. But in an industry where years of scientific research often lead to dead ends, Vas has learned to deal with disappointments and to glean valuable lessons from them. This is how Vas Narasimhan navigates failure. So talk to me, if you would, a little bit about how you learn how to fail. Was there a moment where you said, I've got to get better at this?
I had been very fortunate in my career that throughout the whole process, I had success after success. There were setbacks, but I would never say failures on the scale you fail as a CEO. We had a situation where, we were hitting record high share prices, and then within a month, we had a major drug get pulled for a safety issue. We had a global pandemic, and suddenly valuation was completely wiped off the table. You go from being a hero to a zero in the investor base, in the media, and suddenly you have to grapple with that. And you largely grapple with that alone as a CEO. And I think you come to a place where you either realize you're going to let all of this make you feel small or destroy you, or you're going to say, I can learn from this, I can get stronger, and I'm going to get knocked down again, I'm going to get back up.
So what is that process for getting back up, and how has it changed for you?
I took these setbacks really hard, and I took them very personally. And I think you have to be able to separate who you are as a person from the role. And that I think is easier said than done when you're a CEO. It all gets mixed up. But when you can separate yourself from being a CEO and who you are as a person, you start to have, I think, a better sense of self to say, look, these things are going to happen. It's okay. I think the natural thing is I think you're a victim. This has happened to me. It's so unfair, right? And if you can learn to move on from this feeling like something is unfair and rather say, look, these are events, they've happened. I could have done things that are better. I could have changed maybe how I looked at a situation and process that, and then quickly move on to, okay, next thing. I need to learn from it. I need to grow from it. But I'm not going to let this completely change who I am as a person. I've also learned to reach out for help a lot more. I have two coaches, and I have an extraordinary wife who is my lead coach. And I think without all of that, learning to reach out for help to process all of this is also, I think, a big, big learning for me.
Of course, it's not enough for the CEO to be great at bouncing back at failure. Vas wants employees across Novartis to be resilient and growth-minded. As he reshapes Novartis' culture, he draws inspiration from the book Unboss, which emphasizes the importance of decentralizing power and creating a culture of accountability and trust. He applies those principles to the company, encouraging teams to assume ownership and to proactively end projects that don't meet Novartis' rigorous standards. Vas calls it a high-support, high-challenge environment. You've talked in the past about this idea of raising the standard for what gets funded within Novartis. I would assume that means the teams internally are dealing with this question of, they might be like, oh, I've got this great new drug that I'm working on, and you're like, it's good, but it's not good enough. How do you teach people to deal with that new higher bar? And then how do you teach them how to deal with the perception that they have failed?
I think first you have to try to get teams to separate personal conflict and task conflict. People take it as a personal affront, but it's all about the task. First, you have to acknowledge the fact that, look, it's amazing that we found a new drug, but we're not the right company to actually bring this medicine forward because we operate at a scale where the impact has to be large enough. And I think historically we had that bar way too low because we were the leader in the industry in the number of medicines approved, but not the leader in the value, scale, scope of medicines approved.
But has there been an effort culturally getting teams to separate the personal from the business?
There's always a flip side to every culture. So when we rolled out Inspired, Curious, Unbossed this culture, people loved the positive sides of this culture. But people didn't necessarily embrace the other side, which we didn't talk enough about, which is that you have to be totally accountable. everyone thought this was just going to be like a complete free-for-all. We're free, right? And that was not the intention. And one of the things I've learned is I have to show in our meetings, our discussions, I'm ready to be challenged. And then you get better decisions and a better environment.
Does part of that require people to also make the calls on when they should shut down projects?
Yes, and that was the aspiration. But it turned out, I think, over the years we've learned it's much harder to do in practice. And I think in large organizations, as you push accountability down, for teams to be comfortable making those decisions. So what often happens is no decision gets taken, right? So we've really had to adapt and say, look, the spirit of this is we want a very empowered organization. If you did your job well and the science just didn't work, there's no personal consequence to you. But we need the flip side too. We need people to really hold themselves to high standards, high accountability, and that's been a transition side. Don't ever paint a culture with just the good side.
I mean, I would think that's a normal part of how pharma works anyways. You've got a success rate of only like 5% on human clinical trials, right?
It's an interesting thing that we are an industry that fails all the time, but not great at learning and kind of processing failure in a way that lets people grow.
Yeah, you would think that you guys would be
we
the
should be
world
like the best.
leader.
We should be the best at this, right? But we certainly need to be.
I guess it's human nature.
Absolutely.
Dealing with setbacks isn't easy for anyone. What helps people move forward with enthusiasm is a sense of purpose and excitement about what's possible. Vas sees that as one of his most important roles. You talked about being the chief energy multiplier within the company. Yeah. What does that mean? Why do you talk about that?
Well, it's actually a concept I learned from my longtime coach. He used to always say, look, your job is a chief energy officer, chief energy multiplier. And you realize that, what you can do in this role of CEO, how do you get these people to bring energy to the work that they do? And bring energy because they have a sense of purpose, they believe in the culture, they believe in the mission. That's actually the biggest thing you can do as a leader. But one of the lessons is in order to give energy, you have to have energy.
I gotta tell you, this is not an area that I ever talk to my managers about, and now I'm really kicking myself because I've just assumed that as a manager, you come in with energy, but I don't think it is a known practice. How you deliver the information is as important or is essential to what people are hearing. What kind of advice do you give to first-time managers or early managers to think about the energy that they're bringing to the room?
If you can't lead yourself, if you can't manage your own energy, it's very hard to convey anything to anyone else. And so do the work to figure out what are the practices that enable you to have energy about the work. Because I think as apes, we transmit a lot based on subtleties, right? And so people can sense whether somebody's energetic or not. You can't fake it. That's one of the I think, realities of leadership.
And what do you do if you just don't have it in you?
Actually, just tell your team, I'm having a bad day. Because again, it's all of these nonverbal cues, it's the body language, it's all of these things. Vas's conviction about the importance of accepting failure and the power of energy are intimately tied. For leaders who want their companies to take risks and push their limits, learning how to harness both is key. Here's what jumped out at me. Failure without excitement leads to burnout. Creating energy without insisting on innovation, that's just cheerleading. So how do you practice both? Let me know in the comments, and you can dive deeper into this topic on the This Is Working podcast. That's available anywhere you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the This Is Working newsletter using the link you see on the screen.